Hello and welcome to today's Sports Psychology Screencast. The focus is on group and team dynamics in sport. So we're going to be looking at a couple of things really. First up, we're going to be looking at the definition of a group. So what is it that makes a group a group? And then once we have an understanding of that, we're going to be looking at the specific stages that groups go through in order to reach elite performance. I'll put a picture on the slide here of Manchester City, who very recently, at the time of recording this, won the treble. Now that is up there with the biggest achievements that you can do in club football. So what I'm interested in to say that, some people think that this just happens, but actually it's a really, really specific process of going through different stages with a group and new groups to enable a team to perform at the very, very top level. So let's have a look first of all then, what makes a group a group? So in terms of our definition, we have to look at the following. A group is a collection of two or more people working towards a common goal or a shared goal. That's what it is. So it has to be more than one person. So we'll say two or more people, okay, that are working together towards some kind of shared goal. That's how you would define a group. Now, of course, it's not always that easy because when we get into groups, sometimes people within that group aren't working towards a common goal. So what we're going to have a look at then is the stages that, Tuckman, who is a psychologist, had a look into with regard to the stages that a group will go through. So he identified 4 stages that a group will pass through, depending how successful. Some of these stages will be the group will last that for longer. Sometimes the group won't get through some of the stages, and they end up the group will fold and not perform at a high level. So let's have a look at what these stages are. So the first one that we have to know is the forming stage. Now, you don't have to make notes of what I'm saying here, but if I said to you the forming stage, it's basically when the group get to know each other. Okay. Now, following that forming stage, we then go into something called the storming stage. So once people have got to know each other, we'll then go to this stage where there will start to be conflict within the group. There might be some kind of, some cliques emerging. There are subgroups where certain people are not working towards the shared team goal. There might not be a shared team goal at this point. Now, following this storming stage, which is really, really beneficial a lot of the time for a group, once this storming stage is over, you then start to move into this idea of the norming stage where behavior in the group is normalized. People might now start to work towards a common goal. They might start to socialize outside of the team environment. And then finally, once you've got to this normalized group behavior, you're then in that position where you can make the next step, which is referring to the performing stage of group development. Now, the performing stage of group development basically looks at this idea that you are all working towards a common or shared goal. You have aims, clear aims that you want to win, whatever you're competing in. So that's basically your 4 stages. Now, as you can see, they are the names of the 4 stages, and I've just give you, just to try and introduce you to those stages of group development, you're going to need to be able to identify those 4 stages that groups go through in order to be successful. The key thing I just want to draw your attention to now, what are you going to have to do then? So for each of these stages, you're going to be looking to make sure you've got 3 or 4 descriptors that will enable you to describe how a group would be operating in these distinct stages of group development. So ultimately, if we say just a round number of 4, we've got 4 stages of group development, and then you times that by 4. That looks like you're going to have 16 pieces of information, which is a lot to take in one screencast. So what I'm going to try and do for this is say for each stage of group development, we're going to use a common framework. Now, this common framework is going to be a mnemonic, which is a sentence to help you recall the information so you can then apply it to each of the stages of group development rather than learning 16 distinct separate pieces of information. Let me explain what I mean. So if we've got our stages of group development across the top here, forming, storming, norming, performing, they are across there. What we're going to look at then for our answer framework, we're going to use a sentence that directly links to the stages of group development, but for each of those words in the sentence, we're going to use that as a framework by which we can describe each of the stages of group development. So if a group's going to be successful, we're going to use this mnemonic. So a leader should provide specific roles and goals. So we've got this, a leader should provide specific roles and goals. That is going to be a framework or a mnemonic to give us the key I suppose, stimulus by which we can describe each of the stages of group development. If you wanted to make a note of what this means in relation to each of those stages, well, each stage will involve a leader. Some stages more than other. So what we have to say is, how does the leader contribute to the decisions within the group and the behavior of the group? Now, each stage will have something specific in terms of information that we can use. So there'll be some specific, so for example, just to give you a quick one, forming stage of group development, the specific piece of information I'd want you to know is that the group get to know each other. That is something specific to the forming stage of group development. Now, for each stage of group development, we then need to consider roles and goals. Now, what does that mean? Basically, we're talking about, are the roles within the group at each stage accepted and clear? Okay, now that's the kind of thing we'd be asking. So, for example, in the forming stage, because the group are just getting to know each other, they will have no clear roles, or they might not have accepted roles. So that straight away gives us a way we can answer that. The final thing we have to look at is going back to our key definition of a group. A group is a collection of two or more people working towards a common goal. So the next question we have to ask ourselves for each stage, do they have the group have a common or shared goal? So if we look at this situation now, forming stage, because the group are just getting to know each other, they might not have, or they won't have, a clear common or shared goal at this point. Okay, so that's what we're looking to make sure we can do. That's how I want you to use this framework, and I'll use that as we go through the stages of group development. So starting off then, first stage, forming. As I said to you before, when you're in this stage, a group development will come down to the minute, it's when the group get to know each other. But before we go into the specific descriptor, we're going to go and have a look at the leader. So in terms of the leader, what is their role with regard to decisions and behaviour in the forming stage of group development? Well, firstly, the leader takes main responsibility for decision making. It is their responsibility to make the decisions for the group because they're still getting to know each other. Now, as I said before, the specific descriptor from the forming stage of group development is looking at this idea whereby the group gets to know each other. Okay, that is the specific bit of information that you would use. On top of that, when it comes to roles, at this stage of group development, there will be no clear roles within the group, or some of the roles might not be accepted. And finally, when you're into the forming stage, there will be no common or shared goal. So that's what we have to do. These are the key triggers, but to make them, developed right, you would need to just make sure you've done what's in black here. They're the notes you would need to make. Okay, so that's our forming stage. Now what we're looking for from here then is to go on to storming. Now, once everyone's got to know each other, there comes a point when it kicks off. Okay, what we have to do is be able to put that into technical language that will allow us to get full marks when we're talking about the storming stage of group development. So, what is it that the leader is responsible for when you're in the storming stage? So, for storm, for me, the translation is conflict, the specific translation. So if there's conflict in the group, what's the leader going to have to do? Well, the leader, in this case, a strong leader is required to guide the group through the conflict in this stage. Okay, so that's what they are there for. They guide the group through that stage. Now, the specific bit of information that makes this stage of group development, the storming stage, unique is this idea that, there's conflict between members. So what I've put in here, there is conflict between group members, and I've also put this as an additional because if you were going to say why this conflict or when this conflict happened, it leads to something called subgroups emerging or cliques emerging. So if you think of a professional football team, okay, women's or males, you will have teams or players from lots of different nationalities. So what you might have is in the changing rooms, a group of people from one country, group of people from another country. They might not be happy with what the coach is doing or what the team is doing. Some of them might not be playing. So they create cliques or subgroups, and they can be really detrimental to the group moving through the stages. So once we've got that, when we get down to roles, just so we're aware, we're not going to use a roles for the storming stage because we've got two descriptors in the specific part of the storming stage group development. The next thing we'll have a look through here then is goals. Now, this is a really, really important one. This is our the mid stage. So when we talk about this, we can't say there's no common or shared goal. We can't say there is definitely a common or shared goal. We have to go in that kind of halfway house. So in this one, we're going to say that the group may start to have a shared goal. So you're not being committal here. You're not saying they haven't, you're not saying they have, but you have to say they may have it. And the reason for this is that, if the group, in this case, if I just kind of put it into perspective, if the storming happens and the storm happens quickly, the conflict is overcome quickly, you might start to get a shared goal quickly. But if the storming lasts for a long time, it might stop you from getting a shared goal. So that's what we're looking at there. There are key points for storming. So if we go on from here, let's have a look at our next one. So now we go into norming. So now we've got over the conflict. We've got over the storm in the group. So what we have to do now then is say, right, how will this change? How will all this stuff down here change from what was in storming and before that forming? So in this case, what is the leader there? So at this point, it's a really, really good one because the leader is now respected, if you want to make a note of this, because they have guided the group through the conflict. So they are now respected. And loads of examples of this. For example, I look at, Pep Guardiola, as I put up as a picture earlier, as a leader of Manchester City. He had a huge storming phase when Yaya Toure, who was a key player in the past before Pep Guardiola arrived, went to the media, made some disparaging comments about Pep Guardiola. There was a storming period. Yaya Toure left, and then from there, the group then normalised their behaviour. And as a result of that, the leader now becomes respected because they've guided the group through a conflict stage. Now, from here, what is the specific things that happen to the group in the norming stage? Now, what happens here, because they've got over the storm, they now may start to get on, or they may start to socialise outside of the team or the sport dynamic. So that is the specific bit of information I'm going to ask you to use for the norming stage of group development. Now, following this, what's next? Roles. Okay, so in this point, as we start to move towards the higher end of the stages of group development, the roles are clear and accepted. So we now got these roles are clear in the group and they're accepted by the group. That's a really, really important point there. And of course, it starts to get easier now because what we're saying with regard to goals, there is now the group are now working towards a common or shared goal. So that is something that is relatively, hopefully, straightforward in terms of how you would build that up. And that then takes us into our final stage of group development, which is the performing stage of group development. So now we're at that point. We've normalized behavior. There's conflict is overcome. If there is conflict, let's have a look what happens in this performing stage, because it's unrealistic to say there's never any conflict. So what happens? So when we get to this point, it's really, really important. As you would have noticed, we started off forming stage, leader makes all the decision. Storming stage, strong leader required to take the group through conflict. Norming stage, the leader is now respected for guiding the group through the conflict. Now we're into the kind of the performing stage. What happens here then? Well, what happens here is this. The leader will take a step back from the group, and the group will take more or full responsibility for decision making. Okay, so then if we go into here, what is the specific things that will happen? So an example of the group taking responsibility for decision making gives us some specific information, because when you're in the performance stage, the group will actually resolve disagreements themselves. Okay, so the disagreements when you're in the performance stage will be resolved between the group members themselves. They do not need the leader to make any decisions, as we looked at on the point before, to help that. Then we go into roles, and hopefully you can start to see how this will look. So now what you're in the performance stage, you're working towards winning league titles. Not many groups get to this point. So what happens here? Roles now are clear amongst the group. And the final thing is, we get to this point now, there is 100% a common and shared goal. And it's really, really important we add this in. There are clear aims within the group. So it's all right just saying have a common and shared goal. We need to say the aims of the group are aligned. Those aims are to win the league, to win the tournament, to win whatever it is they're going into. So they're the key points that I'd want you to have a look at and make sure you can return to and use as a framework. So if you wanted to have a look at how this might look in an exam question, if you have a look here, so we've got a question building up saying forming is the first stage of group development. In this stage, a sports team, depends on the leader for direction, and the team members start to get to know one another. So it's giving you a start point. It then says, using the example of a sports team, describe the next two stages of group development that the group would go through. So at this point, you now need to know that there are the next two. So you need to know that it's storming and norming. What I would ask you to do on here, this has some nuance in the question, the example of a sports team. All that means is you have to now use your framework for the stages of group development, but then always hook it back to the team. So for example, if you have a look onto here, how would I go? Well, I put my framework down here and then I'd apply it to storming first up. So let's have a look at how that might be written. So what I would say, first things first, the leader. Okay, what does the leader do in the storming stage? So in this case, I would say a strong leader required to guide the sports team through this stage. So all I have to do is make reference back to the nuance of the question, sports team, and then from here I've given my leader information. Then I might go down to the storming stage. What's the specific thing that I need to talk about here? Okay, so hopefully you could talk about this idea of conflict, maybe subgroups. The sports team will experience conflict, etc. So hopefully you can have a look and see how that would look in terms of answering the exam question. So I just wanted to show you that in terms of how this would look with regard to responding to an exam question. Okay, right. Thank you very much